Today we are pleased to welcome Volko Ruhnke, the esteemed designer of the popular Coin series of board games, Labyrinth, the War on Terror, and his latest, Nevsky. We fell so easily into talking about board games and their design that we weren't recording the first 5 minutes, so we will join the conversation already in progress here on Legendary Tactics.
Yeah. Do I see my games as
organic, organically growing, where the game kind of, it starts off in one direction, but then with rule clarifications and things like that, where all of a sudden maybe it starts heading down different paths that you're like, okay, this game can morph a little bit, or it can, like, a little bit of organic growth, I guess.
Yeah, I very much do, and I hope so. And that is my hope for them. And I think, first of all, that's a strength of board games as compared to, watching movies or playing video games or many other media. Is a board game, we really own it. When we have to operate the system, we have to understand the rules. And if we want to adjust that experience to our taste, we take a pencil, or we should, and we cross out a rule we don't like and we write our own rule, And that's long before I was designing anything from scratch. I had made that step to say, well, I love this experience, but I don't think this bit is quite right, or is quite to my taste, or whatever. And I started tinkering with rules, right? And eventually I think I could make a whole better game on this topic than what's available. And that's a strength. And so that's what I want. I want to see for my games too. I want to have other people interacting with them and taking them and doing something else with it that suits them better and is even more fun and is even more of a joy. And so the fact that we can go back and change something. I mean, again, this isn't, you get a rule book. When I was a kid, a rule book, it was almost like the word of God. There's some professional somewhere and they know this history and this is all fact. It's interpretation. And there are so many decisions that go into it by the designers and the rest of the team, that every player playing it is bringing something to it. I mean, if you play a distant plane, most likely you already know something about Afghanistan and the war there. You're not a clean slate. You're bringing your own model, your own mental model to it and interacting with the game. And so if then you're like, well, wait a minute, I can synthesize what the designer has done and what I know and make something better. I mean, that's how innovation works, right? Then you should, in my view. And so I love to see that going on. So it's not the case that, okay, it's published and therefore, I mean, it gets trickier. The thresholds for change absolutely go up as you go through development and test and into art and printing and then out to the market. It's not the case that it would be right for me or productive to say, okay, well, everything you just bought, forget it, scratch all that. It's all changed now because I've changed my mind. No. I mean, yes, there's some contract in there, but there may be a case where, hey, look, now that we have more experience, we had maybe dozens, if we're lucky, of people play testing this before it was printed. And now we have hundreds or possibly thousands of people have played it. And some of those have given feedback. We've learned that we can make this thing better. Here are a few changes. Here are a few designer variants. Try these. If I can do that without undoing the product, that you've purchased and the common experience that you can have with other people who also have that game, then yes, I want to do that. So I don't know if I think it's Mark Herman. I always say it was Mark Herman, but it sounds so Mark Herman. But the saying is, a game is never finished, only published.
Yeah, I think that is him, actually. I seem to remember that. Yeah, because that was the case with coins around, I guess, Liberty or Death. I don't know if it was Harold Buchanan that came up with the idea of when the prop card comes up or whatever the equivalent is, that it happens immediately. You don't have that advanced knowledge. It's a sudden.
Harold Buchanan and developer Mike Berticelli did.
Yeah, and because that was a neat innovation that in many ways,
right.
I think not that it was bad before, but if there were any sort of gamey effects that came from that mechanic, it solved them. And in a really smart way. Yeah,
and I know you're interested in the question of collaboration, but that's just a perfect example of how, just evidence that it's a mistake as a designer to just be, protective and, I have this pure thing, and don't you dare dilute.
Don't circling the wagons.
Yeah.
No, you don't. No, you don't. I don't, every model can be improved. Every model is wrong. So every model can be made less wrong, for example, if we're talking about historical simulation. And the state of the art, I mean, board game design and war game design, look how far it's come since any past decade you want to name. It improves every decade. We get a bigger toolbox. We learn more of what, how to get better effects, how to simulate things in a fun way, and so on and so on and so on. And why is that? It's because we're eager to innovate. It's because we're not protective of pure forms, and so how do I do that myself? Well, I can do that myself. I look for new things and try to take on new challenges in terms of design and so forth, come up with new ways to solve problems. But boy, it's so much more effective if you have a diversity of talent, of knowledge to bring ideas in. And that's the most important demonstration that the Coin series offers us, in my view, is look at all that's there that I never would have attempted. I wouldn't have conceived of it, much less attempted and thought I could pull off what some of these designers, Harold and others, have done.
Yeah. No, that's great. And so like, that's certainly one of the pros of it. Do you find downsides to collaborating sometimes though, with, I don't know, disagreements or,
Well,
finding hard to, each of you are sold on one particular mechanic?
Yeah, I mean, I embrace difference of vision because that's kind of the point, is somebody else seeing something that I would not have seen to synthesize that somehow. It can be challenging to synthesize, and you need to be discriminating, right? You have to have roles. If I'm the designer and I have developers and play testers and artists, they can, I want them to suggest anything that could be improved in the design. But at the end of the day, I have to weigh those suggestions. So as I learned brainstorming, structured brainstorming, and as I try to practice it, it's step one, collect all the ideas you can. Step two, throw out the bad ones, right? So the downsides there are, it takes more time to do all of that. And you have to remember, as you're embracing diverse cognition and synthesis and all that, embracing collaboration, it doesn't mean everything that comes out of that has equal merit. And there has to be some way, some structure to do the second part of brainstorming, which is you zero in on what is new and useful. You spend a time not evaluating ideas, just collecting ideas, right? And eliciting ideas, but you do have to do the second part that's maybe less happy for everybody, where you evaluate those ideas and implement what really does improve.
And do you find that the board game design community is very collaborative in nature? Is that?
Pardon me. I have found it to be extremely collaborative and supportive, and now it just in spades through Discord with a new and rather topically obscure wargaming series, Levy and Campaign. I had sort of here and there different folks I was in contact with through email or whatever, who had some ideas. And with designer Francisco Gradeja setting up a Discord server, we have an online design studio. And to me, it's just amazing. We have over a dozen projects going. We're going to have more ready designs than I think the market can absorb, much less CMT actually, print. And again, they're all doing things that I could never have done, and quite fast, actually. And so what makes that happen? I mean, Discord is a nice tool, and if I'm going to be immodest, I hope I'm the kind of expert who draws other experts to him, what we like to look for in experts, in my view. But it comes down to people being willing to get together and do things together, to contribute to somebody else, even though their name's not going to be on the box. They care about it and they contribute. And even if they haven't done something before, they put something else of themselves forward, and they don't cloister. You know what I mean? They don't worry that their ducks aren't in a row. They don't say, well, this isn't ready for prime time, so I'm not going to share it with anybody until I'm tinker with it for another 3 hours. They just kind of put it out there. And we have had so little trouble. I mean, it's basically open, and we're just we're talking through all the different design issues and all the stuff that in theory is not ready for prime time. And there's been remarkably little interference of people coming in and, sabotaging or disturbing that in any way. It's all almost all positive interaction. So that does, I think, say something about the community, about the hobbyists, about what people who play games, design games, develop games, and so forth, what they're interested in having in their hobby. And it's highly open and collaborative in my experience.
Yeah. Oh, that's it. Yeah, it's great to hear. I've often wondered if it's because, board gaming is pretty niche, and it's almost like we feel under assault from video games and television. So we kind of,
try being an old-fashioned board war gamer, because now you're niche within the niche.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, board games are a giant universe, so yeah. But no, go on. No, absolutely. But what do you think that leads to? What do you think that leads to, that feeling of being a niche and being under assault?
Well, again, I think it builds a stronger sense of community. It's almost like us against the world. We have a hobby that we really are passionate about, and then not a lot of people understand as I'm pushing counter or cylinders or cubes around on a board. And
and I don't know if this is a conceit or not, but I think it's there unspoken, and I think there's some sense to it that, again, if you have to learn a game and play it, and you're putting an active energy that is an intellectual energy into that activity for fun, that, anybody can sit in a movie theater right now. The audience is interacting with the film and they're receiving it different ways, and they're thinking, and I'm not trying to say that it's not intellectual, but the threshold, anybody can sit there and watch. Anybody can watch a sports game. All right. So what most people in the West spend most of their time, anybody can go sit on a beach. Okay. What most people spend most of their free time doing in the West doesn't have the maybe mental barriers to entry. I hope this is fair to say that board gaming does. And so for that reason, the hobby participants might be destined to be a sort of an elite, or at least think of themselves in that way, and realize that there must be a bound. I mean, board gaming has been growing and growing and growing, and war games, historical board games with it, right?
Yes.
So it's been growing, but there must be walls to that room, right? At a certain point in the population, not just in terms of interests, in terms of inclinations, and in terms of, I hate to say capacity, but at least the nature of somebody to make that intellectual effort for fun, right? It's not that you couldn't, but you have to actually get into that, to get into trying to figure out this rule book, right? For example.
Well, Volko, NATO and I have very affectionately termed many of, I think all of your games actually, brain burners. So,
okay.
Because when you sit down to any game that you've been part of, it does require exactly a fair bit of mental faculty and thought process, decision making, and all of that that goes along with it. So it's been.
But again, I think that's a strength, because as you said, I think it's fair. I find even myself that I will sometimes flip over the box and I'll check what the complexity rating is on the back. Sure. And if it's 9 or 10, I'm just like, realistically, I may not get the time or the energy to learn this one. So I don't think it's unfair to say that at all.
Yeah, and and I'm not trying to say that complicatedness is a good thing. It's a burden and it's a barrier. And to me, elegant design tries to bring that barrier down as low as possible while also achieving the purpose of the design, whatever that is, right? Delivering that simulation and those decisions and that play experience, whatever it is, with as little complication as possible, right? That's what I think is a designer should be trying to do. And it's a balancing act. And the question then for me becomes, is it worth it? Do I get the payoff for investing in that complicatedness in what I'm experiencing in play of the game? And for many games for me, that's no. So I also will, I want to know, well, how many details, if I have to, every time I do speaking in war game terms now, every time I carry out a combat, I have to go down a list of over a dozen die roll modifiers and do a lot of addition and subtraction every combat.
Yeah.
I maybe can appreciate the model, but I'm probably not going to appreciate the play.
Yeah.
That could be a barrier.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. Now, but you started out with Avalon Hill back in the day and
Sure.
France 1940, which is not an easy game, especially as a kid to learn that, as a young person.
Yeah, and which of course we didn't necessarily play right.
Yeah.
But here's the thing: no lives were lost.
All were counted.
Yeah, no cardboard widows. We didn't understand zones of control. We didn't understand how the forest movement rules worked.
Yeah,
we had fun, and we did learn about that campaign.
Yeah. Oh, that's good. Well, what if those early games that you played were an influence? Like, do you see any influences coming through, especially in your designs? Because you've had a lot of diverse kind of games that you've produced so far.
Well, I think many of them, and in ways that I can't necessarily, in many cases, put my finger on. Although in retrospect, some stand out, and I can put my finger on how. But this is what we have to understand: is I think for to be a great writer, you have to read a lot. You have to acquire a vocabulary. You have to see how other writers have done plot and characterization, so forth. You have to, if you're going to write about a setting, you need to, travel there and see it to better describe it, all that sort of thing, right? So, it's not just like sitting in the basement and, I'm brilliant, so here's this thing, right? And so absolutely, it's the same with board game design. You accumulate a toolbox of how to mechanically represent things and how to solve design problems and what the trade-offs are that you should be aware of and fine tuning and so forth. And so all of those games influenced me, but in retrospect, ones that were particularly important for me were the card-driven games. Originally, Mark Herman's We the People, but the one that was a breakthrough for me was Mark Simonich's Hannibal, Rome versus Carthage, which changed how I looked at simulating war and what was a realistic war game and what wasn't. Because I bought that game as kind of a lark, like I had to look at cards and point to point and, little round pieces with very few factors on them. And, I can play with my boys and it'll be kind of fun. And I played it and I was like, wow, this is actually an excellent model of the Second Punic War. What do you know? And so if you look at my games, all have cards in them with events and trade-off and selecting whether to trigger events or not. And anyways, that all goes back to, Mark Herman's original concept for what's now called CDGs, card-driven games. So if you look at Wilderness War, I think you'll see a lot of Mark Herman, Mark Simonich, and also Ted Racer's Paths of Glory.
Yeah, I was going to say Paths of Glory, Washington's War. Yeah.
If you look at the combat results system in Wilderness War and compare it to Ted Racer's work, I think you'll see the influence there. So that was a big one. And then for the Coin series, similarly, games by Bryant Train and Joe Miranda that did multi-factional conflict and insurgency. And then further back, Nick Karp's Vietnam from 1984, Victor Games 1984, and I spent a lot of my grad school days playing that one game.
Yeah, there was just one game. You didn't actually get a time to play a second.
Yeah, right. The campaign was many hundreds of hours. Yeah, exactly. And yeah, absolutely. And I did have the time back then to do that before I started my, my work life. But it formed my idea of what guerrilla warfare, how it worked, operation, and hopefully Nick Karp got it right, because if he got it wrong,
the dominoes
wandered further off the path. But Nick Karp's Vietnam highly influential in that regard, and many others that I could name, but those are some that come to mind.
So Volko, you mentioned some of the early influences you've had there. Do you find that you've yourself have changed how you approach board game design over your career?
Yeah, over since from Wilderness War to now, I think that the main change is how eager and perhaps confident I am to do new things in new ways. So Wilderness War, the concept there is it's the French Indian War. It's pretty classic CDG, came out in 2001, I think. And the concept there was, okay, if I took something like Hannibal, Rome versus Carthage, and I put the Wilderness War, put the French and Indian War, into that set of mechanics. I used that mechanical way. I need to change some things to adjust the theater, but that was sort of the theory of it, right? It wasn't, okay, I'm going to experiment with some new ways to show particular historical effects or whatever. I want to bring this war, this setting to life, and I'm going to use as the model of that, my main toolkit. I'm going to use this set of games, the CDGs. And it was a very similar thing with Labyrinth, the War on Terror, which is 2009, which was essentially commissioned by Gene Billingsley of GMT. He wanted a game on that topic, and he knew I knew a lot about that from professional life. And so I said, well, I think here's the theory that the war on terror is an ideological global conflict of today, similar to the Cold War. And we have Twilight Struggle, and that works really well. So we'll take Twilight Struggle. If we brought Twilight Struggle up to 2009, when I was designing Labyrinth, how would that work? Well, I'm going to have to change some things, of course. But, but it was really individual, marginal. Okay, I need to show how terrorist cells move around the world. We didn't have that in Twilight Struggle. How do I solve that problem, right? I'm building on, an existing engine and, adding this doodad or
tinkering,
in a way. So not bereft of innovation, but much more modest in terms of what it's aiming for. So with the coin series, with Andean Abyss, I had in hand a mental model that I thought was pretty well-grounded and sophisticated from my work life, again, of insurgency and counterinsurgency in a multifactional context. There were I thought Colombia was a great story to tell, virtually untold in games for the period I did. There was one earlier game, but it actually had been published before the period that's in, earlier. Was,
really?
Yeah, Colombia.
Wow.
Yeah.
Forward thinkers.
Crisis Colombia. And I think it was published in the early 90s. And my, Andean Abyss starts like 1995. Anyway, and I knew I had a kind of a toolbox from CDGs and other games I played and the couple of games I designed, but I wanted to actually get away from some aspects of it. One of them being hand management, which for me is a kind of a mixed blessing for historical simulation. But I still wanted to have something that was similar to that linkage of fleeting opportunities represented by events and your day-to-day bread and butter operations. And I needed a way to simply solve how to show, that you kind of, where the concentrations of guerrillas are, but you don't exactly know where they are to strike them. So how do you do that? And I had some things that had flown out of the solutions, the tinkering solutions out of Labyrinth with regard to covert cells and so forth. And so I put together a new engine that is descended from CDGs, but is not that. And that became the core engine of the coin series. And similar with Levy and Campaign with Nevsky, I wanted to get at some things about medieval operations that I didn't think any games got at, but were very important, such as the limited service obligation of certain lords. And I wanted to apply to the rough command hierarchy and poor communications of that era this really cool command card mechanic from a game called Angola by Ragnar Brothers that, even though it was done in the late 80s, had not been mined for its brilliant game design ideas in the war game world. And I wanted to be the first person to steal this command card idea. And I thought that it would be
they don't mind.
No, I mean, this is it works. And I'm the same way. I mean, what do I hope to influence the state of the art. So I love to see somebody takes a piece of something that I had done in the coin series or whatever, and turn it this way and apply it to a different problem, fit with other things together. Then I feel like that's a win for me. So I hope that the designers of Angola and Mark Simonich and Mark Herman and Ted Racer and everybody else I've stolen from, I think I suspect they appreciate that too, that it's homage to them. And then there was another piece that I wanted to do, which was to have explicit tracking in Levy and Campaign as medieval of, where are supplies, consumables coming from, how are they moved, the logistic part of it that I had seen in some other games like MMP's Africa, Standard Combat Series Africa, for example, and enjoyed, and I didn't think was enough shown in war games. And could be interesting and fun. And so that package is a new package, And so what I think is my approach is I'm less conservative and less consciously saying, okay, if you like that game, here's something that's like that. It's just in a different setting, which was what I did with Wilderness War, and more, here's a new way of looking at a new setting. That yes, absolutely. I'm taking this piece here and that piece there and putting it together in a new way. Again, that's how all innovation works. But it's a new thing. Sui generis.
So you definitely start with the situation you're looking to represent, and then you search around for the mechanics to fit the theme after the fact, right?
Yes, I think by and large, I think that's war game design. And what it should be, because for the wargaming hobby in its tradition, a principle, what's fun and where does fun come from? It's so different for me. But for that, a principal source of the fun is bringing history to life, playing roles in history, experimenting with how things might have gone differently, or seeing if a story recreates itself by the actors and factors in it. So it is a historical model. And so you have to start with, well, what was the history? How did it work? And that's a mental model. What are the dynamics? And then, okay, now we want to model that in the medium of a tabletop game. That should be the design process, and I think is for most war game designers. Now, that said, like this case with the Angola column cards, I had played a lot of Angola, and I had in my head, one day I am going to steal this because this is so cool and nobody else uses it, and it is so
gotta be used.
It is so useful for modeling ragged command systems and ragged collaboration between allies in the operational context, that if I ever get to a point where that's the context that I'm designing in historically, I'm going to use this. And so it's not the case that my first idea was medieval operations, and I said, well, and then I'm searching around for how am I going to do the command system. I already had that tool in the box, if you will. But it's not until that there's a time to reach for it because of the setting I've chosen that I reach for it, at least.
Yeah. Huh. And I guess that comes from all the games you've played over the years, and it gets into your subconscious somehow and comes out as needed. That's great. So how do you see the state of gaming today, especially wargaming? And I mean, you mentioned the innovations and so forth. How do you see things now and how they could play out down the road for the hobby?
Yeah, I mean, the tides are still raising the boats. And, and I mentioned that for board games, there must be an edge to the population of potential board game players that is still a small fraction of humanity, right? But we haven't found the edge of that. And I would say the same for war game, for historical simulations, and for specific things like the coin series. I mean, day to day, it was like, oh, well, here's my first, this is my first coin game. I'm going to try this out, or I hadn't heard of this series, or that sounds cool. So we haven't found the walls of the room yet. And that's wonderful. So I think I'm very bullish on board gaming and my particular corner of it. We're going great guns. To say it's a golden age kind of diminishes my expectations for the future. I think we're broadening, we're improving the state of the art, we're diversifying. I mean, we've had some logistical bumps with supply,
Oh, yeah, you could say that.
Manufacture and delivery and that kind of thing, like the rest of commerce has, and that has real effects, but it's at worst a bump in the road, and we are speeding down the road.
Yeah, and you've also had a chance to see the game systems that you've designed grow beyond what you started. I mean, you were involved in, I think you were involved in the first 1 through 4 basically, and then 6
of the coin series,
and then after that it's kind of beginning to take off on its own.
In varying ways. I was involved in Pendragon, which is 8. I was in the conversation at least on Liberty or Death and Colonial Twilight, but absolutely, at this point, I could be hit by a bus and the coin series would continue, and I think that's precious to me.
Yeah, and what do you think about the games that you're seeing coming down the line? What excites you most about what you're seeing there?
Well, I'm very excited about Red Dust Rebellion, because, well, first of all, because the setting is so different. It has a direction in the design and the art with which I have had. I mean, I was involved in early conversations with Jared, but with which I've had almost nothing to do. So it's going to be like I'm going to be getting it like a totally new game to me, which is going to be personally.
You'll sit down to play it and be like a whole new system.
and yeah, in a way, and naturally, I am eager to see if it reaches board gaming audiences that the coin series has not reached based on the topic. And then what, does that lead? Because I'm always hoping for, splash over among the buckets, or the, handshakes between our little tribes within board gaming and so forth. And so if you like science fiction settings, and here is one that is well developed and draws from a rich tradition of stories about Mars in the future, and also is gritty and realistic with regard to interfactional warfare and politics, does it lead some fraction of those players who enjoy Red Dust Rebellion to go back and say, oh, well, there's also one about Colombia, and I would never play a game about Colombia. What do I care about Colombia? But it's like Red Dust Rebellion, so maybe I'll give it a look. So of course I'm hoping for that kind of splash over effect.
So Volko, you just mentioned, why would I play a game about Colombia? And that's actually, we've noticed a fair bit of a theme in a lot of your different the coin games in particular, is they're off the beaten track a little bit.
Yeah.
How do you go about choosing the game's settings and themes and conflicts?
Yeah. So an important starting point is I'm designing for myself. Again, this isn't my career. I don't have to sell games to make a living. And I'm going to be spending whatever the topic and the setting is, I'm going to be spending a lot of intimate time with it, so I better be into it. Right. And why should I spend all that time and effort to make a game that's like, and is about the same thing as other games already out there that I can buy for $50 or whatever? And my game won't even do it as well. So why should I make a game about the Battle of the Bulge or something? It doesn't seem to me a good investment of my passion. So I'm always looking for things that I feel are underrepresented, because in board wargaming, there's a strong tendency to impulse of traditionalism, which has some important benefits. And I love my traditions too. But it means that we happen to do a lot more in some very narrow lanes because of where we started and who we were when we started in the 1950s. Okay, you can trace back. So there are a ton of games about World War II and European World War II in particular. Well, it's a fascinating topic, and I play World War II games myself all the time. But if you tried to imagine, if you took like board games, historical board games, and you spread them across a timeline of human history, and you, by the way, there's so much focus on military affairs, but you also then said, well, what about political affairs, economic affairs, cultural affairs, social affairs, what about art and so forth, all these other topics that you could have historical simulation, serious simulation board games about. We have some really, sharp spikes and deep troughs and narrow threads in that chart, if you imagine it. And so I'm looking for, what can I fill in? What troughs can I make less deep? Do we have enough operational simulations of medieval warfare? Living Campaign tells you my answer to that question is no. Now, it's a bit selfish, and maybe it's a bit, a matter of a lack of self-confidence, because I have a lot less competition if I do a game about Colombia. Right. I mean, there was exactly one other game.
That's right.
And so part of it is that too. Now I realize that, in the beginning, there's a much smaller group of people who might be the audience who want to play that. But if you're in that group, hey, I've got something for you, and I'm the only.
That's right.
And I have to say that I think what has happened is, if you build it well, they will come. And, the apocryphal, Henry Ford is, if I'd asked my customers what they wanted, they would have said a faster horse, in a way, because of traditions, and it's a hobby. So we enjoyed this thing. So we want to enjoy something that's like that thing. That's quite human. But if we can, if as a designer and publisher, you're willing to, get over that little barrier of, okay, here's a new thing you didn't know you want, but it is made well.
And maybe you'll like it.
Then you can actually influence taste as well. And that's a joy too.
Yeah, but it must be hard putting that first one out there and like, oh boy, I hope this actually sells.
Sink or swim.
Yes.
That's the price you pay for being on the cutting edge, right?
Yeah, and a part of that, it means you can't be in a hurry, especially with, so all my games are through GMT. My games, like everybody else's, have to pass through the P500 pre-order system. They have to get the votes, the support to get printed. And, Andy and Abyss took a while. And, and in fact, and we know why, because Gene Billingsley of GMT Games went on Consum World and said, and asked, he said, GMT's fan base, Volko's had some good designs, he's a good designer, and, why aren't you pre-ordering Andy and Abyss? Which meant that he then had 100 different people telling you why not to buy my game, which was, a little painful to go through, but, 99 answers were because I'm really not interested in insurgency and counterinsurgency in Colombia. And one answer was that I'll always remember it with delight. One answer was, I would buy any game from which I had something to learn about insurgency in Colombia. But given the conceptual mess that is Labyrinth, the War on Terror, I know I will learn nothing from this.
Oh no!
Something
Oh
like that.
no!
So that was
Oh, Volko.
Wow.
That's maybe a Control-Alt-Delete.
I know for me, like when I got Andy and Abyss, and I got it fairly early on, and after it was published, and it was just, I think it was because I bought Labyrinth. I'm like, hey, I like Volko's earlier design there, so I'm going to give this one a go. And it took me a while to get my head around how to play it. It was just, maybe, as you said, descended from CDGs, but it felt really, really new and very hard to kind of grok in the early going.
Yeah.
But well worth it.
Thank you, and I'm glad you stuck with it.
Yes.
So we've got a bit of a philosophical question for you here on as far as picking your card events for the CDG parts of the games, and as far as what's the criteria you use to sort of measure or weigh which events can make it into the game and which one you maybe need to leave to the side, and do you find maybe your own personal bias might impact that or influence those decisions?
Yeah, and the answer to the last bit is absolutely about bias, and I can talk about that too. But the approach is complex adaptive systems, and that historical simulation board games are models of complex adaptive systems, meaning that you have actors and factors. The actors have agency; they make decisions that affect things, and they're all interacting. And those interactions, including of their strategies, their ends, ways, and means, create a larger whole that has a character all its own. Okay, that is not just about what the characteristics are of the individual parts. And that a board game is a fantastic way to bring a system to life and to have players get inside it, and operate it to better understand it, right? So what I'm trying to do, let's say in Andy and Abyss, what I'm trying to do is identify who are the key actors and what are the key factors, and those become players and important general game effects, the environment, what everything's a simplification, of course, because the model. So I'm not going to give you precisely the altitude of every mountain slope, but there's mountain spaces and there's jungle space and so forth, right? Okay. Tropical forest and so forth. Anyway, and so I'm building this model that is going to attempt in a highly simplified way to let you step inside insurgency in Colombia in the 1990s, okay, and bring that system to life. So the key actors, the big ones who have a lot of agency and a lot of effect, those are the players, because I want to simulate important humans with humans, the players. And their ends are the victory conditions. Their ways are mechanics, what they do to achieve those objectives, those victory conditions. And the means are the stuff, the guerrillas or the resources or whatever that they have to do that with. Okay, so this is all systems analysis of complex adaptive systems. And so now you get to there are other actors and there are other factors that maybe aren't key. Maybe they come and go, maybe there's things that, in one historical trajectory would have had an effect, and another one, they just don't have an effect. They don't come up perhaps. And that kind of thing, that kind of actor or factor that does affect the system, just not as fundamentally as the Colombian government, right?
Exactly.
But a particular personality in the Colombian government, or a particular economic aspect of Colombia's trade with the world, or weather, or something else. Anyway, all of those kinds of things are very effectively brought into the central model as cards. And I have a whole talk on YouTube about cards in war games and what they do well and how to use them. And that comes from my experience, principally other designers in CDGs. I mean, to me, the most brilliant thing about Mark Herman's We the People was he brought in other disciplines like politics into a military simulation as a rules exception, and the rules exception is right there on the card, right? And you're right, and that's so powerful. And so the same thing here. So that's the kind of thing looking at. Now, it might be, you could say, well, what doesn't deserve to be there? There are all kinds of personalities in Colombia in the 1990s to the early 2000s that it did not have a plausible effect on insurgency and counterinsurgency in Colombia, right? Well, then I'm not saying they're not wonderful people or important people or whatever or worth studying. It's just they don't affect my system even enough to just be an ephemeral passing opportunity as represented by a card.
Huh. Now, how did that work with Labyrinth? Because when you published that, or even maybe even a distant plane, there were still headlines going, like there were some cards that turned up in Labyrinth that was, from 6 months before publication. Like, how did they fit that in? Like, how do you determine that when it's unfolding? You don't have that historical perspective.
And indeed, that does get us back to your the question about bias, right? Which okay, because we are all as if we are historians, journalists, artists, game designers, movie makers, writers, whatever, we are all filtering tons and tons of data through something. So some kind of filter of our experience, which is actually what you would be paying for if it's a journalist or a historian, right? To give sense to a model of this great complexity that is simplification. Okay, so bias is in it for sure. And we can talk about that vividly in things like Labyrinth or a distant plane. However, it's the same approach. It's still history. And a distant plane, Brian Train and I said, okay, this represents 2001 to 2013. Stop. We're not forecasting anything, right? And that, I think, was it's recent history. The game, came out that year, 2013. It's recent history,
Yes.
but it's history. And we can talk about, is it valid to do recent history? My answer is decidedly yes. But anyway, it's history. Now, there are some things in it that may have had predictive value as we looked at the course of the war and the end of coalition involvement in Afghanistan. And it may not have. I mean, that's a different debate, but it didn't, claim to tell you, here's how the rest of the war is going to go. Now, Labyrinth, I was a little more, I was on shakier ground, perhaps, in what Labyrinth was claiming to be, because it kind of has, 2001 to question mark. So
yeah.
Right. So we didn't yet have, I just did the design in 2009, and we did not yet have the pattern of the war that I think we pretty much had for Afghanistan, for the coalition in Afghanistan in 2013. And so there are some bigger ventures, some guesses, I guess, some biases in the model of Labyrinth to try to, flesh out a trajectory, because it was still kind of early-ish days. Now, in some cases, I'm very proud to say we put things in that hadn't happened that subsequently did happen. Okay, such as success against bin Laden as a target, such as an Islamic state, in effect, Islamist rule that covered more than one country, which seemed preposterous to some in 2009, but occurred in 2014. So that's good. It got other things pretty far off, such as the influence, the reform of Arab governance. There were big changes in the reform of Arab governance with, worse than mixed results, unfortunately, but they didn't principally come from a U.S. actor doing anything, right? So anyway, so we can critique with hindsight that model. But I think most legitimately, where Labyrinth is on more solid ground is as recent history, and trying to show you how two very different key actors, the US administrations, Bush to Obama, and Al-Qaeda and its allies, how these two very different key actors viewed their ends, ways, and means, and how all that interacted in the global war on terror. I think on that, I will defend the model as being, as having some verity, with the acknowledgement that that required a lot of my own biases that in many cases I cannot myself recognize as I'm putting them in the design, because they're mine.
Like with Coin, with Labyrinth, I mean, those, as I said, expanded beyond your initial design. Were you kind of, did you like the direction that they took? I mean, Labyrinth introduced all the Civil War stuff and you know, looking to represent the Arab Spring and all sorts of things, like added in a lot of, to the point where it feels almost like a bit of a different game by the time you get to the second expansion. And
Yeah.
Coin as well has evolved. You know, Gandhi, for example, just was such an incredibly innovative twist on your original mechanics.
Right.
Like, what are your thoughts on how those turned out and where they went?
Yeah, I think both of those examples, Trevor Bender's Labyrinth expansion and Bruce Mansfield's Gandhi, I think those are both vivid demonstrations of what I was saying earlier about the power of, you know, of open design, of collaboration, of embracing innovations that involve different people in the mix to take something somewhere, you know, as opposed to ownership. You know, I mean, I steal other people's mechanics because I don't think they really own them, and I hope people understand that I don't feel like I own, you know, anything here. You know, the publisher owns, in my case, GMT owns the, you know, the Coin series as a trademark and a logo and those specific designs and all that art and everything like that. But the mechanics are just a part of the larger state of the art. And so yeah, that, to me, I take it as a great compliment to the initial model, that it can form a base for something that I had not envisioned. So in the case of Trevor Bender and Labyrinth Awakening and Labyrinth Forever War, as I kind of, you know, mentioned earlier, there are deficits in Labyrinth's model that became apparent with the course of events. And but Trevor saw enough veracity in the core model that he could build on that, add actors and factors that brought it up to date and made it more convincing for the next chunk of years and the next chunk of years. So that, to me, if I'm going to, you know, I'll claim, well, there's resilience to the initial model. Yes, it required, we learned more, different things happened. The model was wrong, of course. But it was useful. It was wrong, but it was useful because we can now have a better model that also has explanatory power for what happened later. And similarly with Gandhi, I had not thought of the decolonization of India as a coin. It was not in my mind. It was not on my screen, right? And the basic engine succeeds through Bruce's design in taking us there, in taking us to passive resistance in colonial India.
No, that's great. So we could talk to you all day, but we want to respect your time as well. So we just have a few we came up with some rapid fire questions for you that we thought you could just give just a quick answer, whatever comes to mind. So
yeah. So your most nostalgic game?
Combat Commander series from Chad and Kai Jensen, because it takes me back to all of those, like Squad Leader and all the World War II games that I played growing up.
Oh, cool. Next conflict you would
Done
want.
right in that case of Combat Commander.
Oh, yes.
Excellent. Excellent. Yes.
Oh, you think Combat Commander did the small level combat better than Advanced Squad Leader?
Yes. Yes. I think, again, and think about what we were talking about earlier about barriers and payoff.
Yeah.
Okay.
True.
To
Very true.
complicatedness, right?
Yeah.
And so to me, Combat Commander, if I were to summarize Combat Commander as a design, it's squad leader plus upfront plus CDGs done right.
Yeah. Nice.
Very cool. Okay, the next conflict you want to look at in either a game designed by you or otherwise.
So getting beyond Levy campaign, because I'm going to be spending a lot of time looking at medieval conflicts, it would be the Revolutionary War in South Carolina. And a particular aspect of it, and that is Bannister Tarleton's hunt for the swamp fox.
Interesting. Best constructed game you've seen?
Like just in terms of mechanics, something that just...
Combat Commander Pacific.
Okay.
Awesome. Game you'd like to give a facelift or a reboot to if you could?
I tinkered with and couldn't get to, I would love to see a more realistic command system for flying colors that produces battles that follow the Age of Sail's so-called tyranny of the line rather than always becoming a furball, which was my experience. And I think it could be done, and it could be done with a Ben Hull style orders system, such as uses in Musket and Pike Battle Series, but I was unable to affect it myself.
Okay. And we already kind of talked on this a little bit about organic growth of the game, but a rule you wish you could change with one of your games, perhaps.
Yeah. I mean, because this is the thing, we can all change any rules we want. So that's the takeaway here. There is no rule you can't change. If you wish you could change it, you can.
Guess what? Yeah, that's true.
You bought the game. It's your game. Change the rule, please do. I mean, because it's another way of enjoying the board games is to change the rules to your liking and see what happens and report. Let us know. But on the other side of that, as you mentioned, my games, when something is printed, then I'm like, oh yeah, I can see. So right now, Nevsky, Volume 1, 11 campaign series, is out of stock at GMT, which raises the theoretical possibility that someday we could have a second edition. So I'm very much now working through with Discord collaboration, what would we change? And so that's the rules for us. So for example, number one would be, we have a much better rule for supply, how you acquire per vendor in the later volumes than I initially put in Nevsky. And I really regret the one I put in Nevsky. So that would be number one.
Awesome. Awesome. Most important skill required to be a game designer?
Yeah, I mean, attribute would be perseverance to get the last, 10% of quality with 90% of the heartache. But skill, I would say systems thinking, seeing complex interactions of individual actors and factors that produce a greater whole. To see that, to formulate a mental model of that, whether it's war or politics or economics, and then to model that in game mechanics, systems thinking.
Okay. Best and worst parts of being a game designer?
Best, seeing people play your design. Worst is seeing all the warts on your design after it's printed.
After it's been released into the wild.
Fair point. Fair point.
Yeah.
Game you're most proud of?
Oh, this is which of my children do I love?
Yeah.
They're all eagerly around you right now.
I can't.
Puppy dog eyes, Volko. Pick me. Or is it a tie?
It's a tie for all of them, is it?
I love all my children and grandchildren. They're all special in their own way.
Yeah.
Oh.
All right. Right. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us. It's really been an honor and a pleasure to connect with you. As I said, we've been a fan of your games for getting close to 15 years here, and looking forward to playing whatever designs you send our way in the future.
Thank you. This was great fun.
Yeah, thanks, Volko.